wish we had we should have had Taylor one. That should have been us, man. Adam Yates doesn't know how to use properly.
It's hard to nowadays, that's the only way to find out what's really going on. Which is sad, because on social media, it didn't do anything, and it's also supposed to be our first mistake, not to be interesting. Oh, really? Sunday. At some point on Sunday, they'll have like,
yeah, it took a while to come all together and set up and get like all the furniture built, but now that it's all set.
yeah, that's
Okay, should we get started? Yeah? Is that on? Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We have been looking at the period immediately after the first and second revelation. We talked about some of the particulars of that. The Prophet ﷺ is in a state of fear, a state of shock. Some of the emotional challenges and human kind of realities that he's experiencing. Then we also talked about who are the first people that embraced Islam after now these initial revelations that came down. So we had Khadija bint Khuwaylid radiallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of the Prophet alayhi salam, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin of the Prophet. Ali radiallahu anh is the son of Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle, but he's about 30 years younger than the Prophet alayhi salam. And last time we talked about also the establishment of prayer, that salah in and of itself isn't something that quite often people have a misconception is established legislatively at the time of Isra and Mi'raj, right? Which just some days ago, some weeks ago, was kind of commemorated in the month of Rajab. The Prophet goes from his home to Jerusalem, ascends into the heavens, and returns all back in one night. And one of the things that he's given at that time is the mandate of 5 daily prayers. But in this early part of Revelation, the angel Jibreel teaches the Prophet how to make wudu and how to make salah. And what they're doing at that time is not necessarily mandated at 5 times of the day. The performance of the prayers, some would say, were maybe confined to 2 times in the day, in the morning and in the night. Allah knows best. Some people say just completely voluntary. For the Prophet, he's praying at night. Right? We looked at the verse, Ya ayyuhal muzammil qum al-layla ila qalila that O Muzammil, stand in the night even just a little bit. But the prayer is something that's there. And they were praying all these prayers in like cycles of two, just 2 rak'ahs. There wasn't the 3 rak'ahs of Maghrib, the 4 rak'ahs of Isha until well after. But they knew how to pray, and Salah was from the very beginning. And we said this is how Ali radiallahu an gets introduced to Islam as a religion, because he sees the Prophet and Khadija like praying together in their home. And he says, what is this thing? Right? So we want to talk about 2 of the other first 4 who convert to Islam tonight, and a little bit about what that initial period was in the propagation of revelation, where the Prophet ﷺ is doing a more private dawah. It's not public as of yet. The first 3 years are done in this way. There's not announcements outwardly. People know, but there's not disruption to kind of the economy or the trade of the day or anything societally. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we're going to talk about 2 people today who are now considered to be amongst that first group of individuals that convert to Islam. And there is a young man by the name of Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu an, and then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an, right? And you remember last time we also said that Waraka bin Nawfal, who's Khadija's cousin, he also is considered to be somebody who became Muslim. There's a hadith where the Prophet says that he has seen Waraka in Jannah wearing robes, and he affirms a belief in the Messenger of God. He passes away shortly after their interaction now after Revelation. But we want to understand these first few people, because everything that we've been saying up until the point of Revelation and now immediately thereafter, it's not stopping. There's nothing without meaning in God's plan, right? And as we start to think about these key figures and who they are and what they represent and how they play critical roles, not just in the establishment of Islam, but the support of the Prophet of God at this time. You imagine for yourself what it's like when individually you have to try to be Muslim in a space that is antagonistic and hostile to Islam. You're the only Muslim in your classroom. You're the only Muslim in your place of work. You might be the only Muslim in your family. You might be the only practicing Muslim in your family. There's all kinds of different things that could come up. From day one, the Prophet is in a place where he's got his wife, and now he's got his cousin, and he's got these other people that we're going to talk about. Waraka, unfortunately, passes away. But Zayd ibn Haritha, Abu Bakr, they're still there, and they're there for quite some time. Right? May Allah be pleased with all of them. So Zayd ibn Haritha, his circumstance is pretty unique in that he is a young boy who is not necessarily, he's not from the people of Quraysh. And his family, their tribe, they live at a little bit of a distance. And he comes to a place where, not to go into too much detail in his story, he is on a trip with his mother, and they take a pause to rest overnight. They pitch a tent, and there's a group of bandits from a tribe called the Banu Qayn. They come and they essentially kind of ransack these tents. They steal all the money, belongings, everything that this group has, but they also kidnap Zayd ibn Haritha. Zayd ibn Haritha, his father's name is Haritha, right? Zayd, the son of Haritha. He becomes very distraught. He is known as somebody who is an avid poet. He writes a lot of poetry for his son in his remembrance. And there's a lot of parallels that we can draw here from other kind of narratives in Quran that enable us to understand some of these things in a very tangible way. Because what's about to happen now is Zayd ibn Haritha, he's been kidnapped by this group that is going to bring him into Mecca, and they're going to sell him as a slave. He's not a prisoner of war. He didn't inherit slavery because his parents were slaves. They took this kid and they essentially traffic him. And the method in which they do this has real life implications. It's not done in a vacuum. So you want to start to piece this together from the standpoint of historical context that's already dealing with the Prophet as a figure who again and again is demonstrating to us the emotional experience. He's a young boy, Zayd ibn Haritha, when he is taken from his family, and his family is also now in a state of disarray. It's pretty remarkable to be able to look at the narratives of a lot of the companions, as well as pretty much every prophet of God that we see, in terms of how family relations impact just their sense of self, so to speak, right? Like Yaqub alayhi salam, Jacob, peace be upon him, his son Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph, peace be upon him, he has a relationship with brothers who cast him into a well. Yusuf alayhi salam is in a place where he's now separated from his family. Yaqub alayhi salam is so distraught, he literally cries himself almost blind. This is a prophet's family. You don't want to have platitudinal understanding of religion that takes defaults and sets them as norms. Like family can be tough and traumas can exist. Emotional angst can happen. There's not a prophet of God that we're taught about who doesn't have some type of family issue. Adam alayhi salam has two sons, one kills the other. Right? Ibrahim alayhi salam has a father who catapults him into a fire with his townspeople. Nuh alayhi salam has a challenge with his son and his wife. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's got numerous challenges with family that we're going to talk about over the course of the next months. It's just rooted in a reality. Here, Zayd ibn Haritha, you're going to see a lot of parallels to his narrative and the narrative of Yusuf alayhi salam. But I want you to think about this now from the standpoint also of divine timing and divine planning. The tears of Yaqub alayhi salam are necessary for Yusuf alayhi salam to grow the entire economy of Egypt. And if it didn't have that difficulty in this one arena, there wouldn't be this growth in this other place. Do you get what I mean? Yaqub alayhi salam doesn't know what's happening. He still has sadness. He's distraught. There's a lot of difficulty that he's feeling. But he still puts his trust in the divine, that Allah knows best. I know that God is not going to put me in a place beyond my ability to handle. The emotionality of it isn't indicative of a weakness of faith. If anything, it's just a sense of a stronger faith that you're willing to give in to what's human fundamentally. Allah is the one that gave you all your emotions in the first place. Does this make sense? So Zayd ibn Haritha, as a young boy now, he is traveling with his mother. This tribe kidnaps him and takes him into the city of Mecca. The system as such that they have developed is that they go into the market and they sell him quickly, and then they leave as quickly as they can. So there's no questions or indication of anything. Like, who are these people? They're not of Mecca. They're from a different tribe. They're in a place where they've systemized this act that is oppressive. They're kidnapping children and selling them as slaves, right? It's still like something that exists today. Allah make it easy for all of us. But you don't want to be absolved of an understanding of responsibility in some of these things, because when we think about what our tradition teaches us, quite often, for example, when we think about zakat, and if we learn like the categories of zakat, emancipation from bondage is one of the categories. People will say, well, how does that exist? Well, you have people who are forced into prostitution, trafficking, all these kinds of things exist not just overseas, but they exist in New York City, right? When they have championship runs, NBA finals, like all kinds of things, the rate through which some of these behaviors increase is exponential, right? People can be disgusting. May Allah protect us from it. Zayd ibn Haritha, he gets put into this like situation. And he's a kid. One of the other things you want to know about Zayd ibn Haritha is that he's black. And this is an important thing to understand because quite often when we engage in discussions of the companions, by the end of it, there's over 100,000 Sahaba. In Sunni Islam, the idea is that all of the companions of God are considered to be a blessed generation. To categorize one as a Sahaba, the classification is rooted in two components: that you've met the messenger of God and that you die in a state of Iman. So there's some people who die as mu'mins, they have a state of Iman, may Allah make us amongst them, but they've never met the Prophet of God. And then there's others who met the Prophet, but they didn't have Iman, so they don't fit into that definition. Of the 100,000+ companions that existed, we don't know a lot of their names. We know comparatively percentages of the whole. And then of the ones that we know, many of them we just know minute details. They might be involved in one hadith or another. And then there's some whose stories we know pretty much in deep detail. Zayd ibn Haritha is one of these people. What I'd like you to do, because I'm talking a lot, if you've never been here before, we talk a lot to each other also. Why is it important to know that he is black? Why is this an important variable in our education of Islamic learning? Because you're going to hear, as we get through this, Zayd ibn Haritha is one of the most beloved people to the Prophet ﷺ. He eventually marries a woman by the name of Ayman Barakah, who we talked about in the first few weeks of this class. She's he's raised with her in his house, right? An Abyssinian woman, also a black woman that is with the Prophet arguably from the day he's born until the day he dies. When people want to remember the Prophet after he passes away, the likes of Umar and Abu Bakr, they would go to this woman, Ayman Barakah, to just listen to her talk about him because of the close bond that they have. They have a son by the name of Osama ibn Zayd, who there's hadith where the Prophet would put him on one knee and Osama on the other knee and make dua that, Ya Allah, put his own grandson, on one knee and Osama ibn Zayd on the other knee, and would make dua that, Ya Allah, love them as I love them. Like he loves Osama ibn Zayd because he loves Ayman Barakah, the mother of Osama ibn Zayd, and he loves Zayd ibn Haritha, the father of Osama ibn Zayd. These are all black companions, but we don't necessarily get taught this. Do you get what I mean? Why is it important that we learn that the companions of the Prophet, who were senior companions, out of the 100,000+ that we know existed, he gave a farewell khutbah to, they engaged and interact and grew these, and the names that we know, not just minute details, but deep details of, some of these senior companions, they're not Qurayshi, they might be Arab, but they're black Arabs or they're Africans, right? Why is it important that we know some of these things? If you can turn to the persons next to you, if you don't already know them, change some names. If you've never been here before, it's not the space where you only talk if you feel like you know what's right, or you keep yourself because you're worried about saying what's wrong. Just what does it give you an inclination towards, so we can also get comfortable in expressing ideas and viewpoints on religion, so it's not just front-facing, somebody's telling you absolutely. I will tell you that it is important, so in your conversations, the conclusion can't be, it's not a big deal. It's a very big deal, right? But you want to start to think about why. Why is it a big deal that we know that Zayd ibn Haritha was a black man? And why is it also then important for us to reflect on, how come people don't talk about these things? Why aren't we told that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh is described as being dark-skinned with his hair in braids? He was known by the Prophet as being someone, if you wanted to learn Quran, the Prophet said, go talk to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, right? He is like a lofty companion of the first converts to Islam. Do you know what I mean? A lot of things that we gain from, if you follow Hanafi fiqh, he influences the people of Kufa, where the Hanafi school gets developed. He's also black. So if you can turn to the persons next to you, why do you think it's important for us to know these things as we're learning about these individuals, both for us contemporarily as well as for us to understand societally what's going on there and the establishment of this like religious community, this ummah, all of these things together? But discuss for a bit and then we'll come back and talk about it. Go ahead. Thanks, man.
So I think like I know people actually yeah, or when I travel, I get to be like, no, you're absolutely like you speak Arabic.
I was actually back last weekend.
What does it look like?
One thing that came to my mind is
there are a lot of research that's not know there are a lot of black people, especially when it comes to really
nobody's not significant because it highlights the extent of the struggle. People like that. So that's the first thing it should
also like it's pretty
That's a big thing.
I tell people on the job.
Just like
Did I ask a lot of questions? No, but I remember you were pretty charming guy.
Okay, so what do we think? Like, why is this an important thing for us to know? Why is it important for us as we're learning? Why do we want to know, or why should we know that Zayd ibn Haritha, other companions, like they're black? He's a black man. What do you think? Yeah.
I think it's really great representation for younger black Muslims, especially even like reverts that feel like Islam is maybe like kind of religion. Because a lot of the time people don't know much beyond like Bilal and Islam. So just like growing up and knowing that like you can be, you know, a Hafiz or like you can be successful in your faith even if you're not Arab, like it's not an Arab-centric religion, which is kind of like the stereotype.
Yeah, and who has this stereotype?
Contemporary.
Say it again?
Contemporary Muslims.
Yeah, it's not just stereotypes others have of us, but also things that we have of ourselves, right? Like if you tried to picture a group of companions in your head, would they be a bunch of black men or black women, right? Like what do they look like in your head? Do you get what I mean? And representation matters because you see the consequences of this even societally today, right? If you go listen to an amazing TED Talk by a Nigerian scholar, her name is Chimamanda Adichie. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. And she's essentially in a place. Has anybody heard the TED Talk before? The Danger of a Single Story?
It's amazing.
You've heard it?
Yeah.
Are you the only one that's heard it?
I hope not.
Who said they heard it? You heard it? Sorry, I should move this thing. Yeah, like, is anybody praying back here? There. Oh, okay. So, she essentially talks about so much in relation to storytelling, but the way it gets premised is how she is a young Nigerian woman, is growing up in Nigeria, and she realizes all the characters in the stories that she's writing are like white people. And she is exposed primarily to stories and narratives of people. And she's like, I'm writing stories about white people drinking tea and eating biscuits, you know? But she's like, we don't need to drink tea and eat biscuits. So why am I writing stories about people who drink tea and eat biscuits? Do you know what I mean? And you think about it for yourself in terms of representation and gross misrepresentation of things, right? And we could go into it a lot, but this is one aspect of it. And internalizing racism comes through these mechanisms. What else? Like, why is it important that we know that this man is a black man and that he's not the only one? It's not an oddity, but there's a lot of people, right? And in addition to this, we can talk Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian. Suhaib al-Rumi is a white-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes, right? Abu Dhar is from the Ghaffar tribe. Like, there's so much representation that is other than just people of Quraysh. Do you get what I mean? What else did we discuss? Like, why is it important that we know this? Yeah, you can keep talking. Go ahead.
I think another thing that stuck out for me was the fact that it's noted that he had braids in his hair, because I think a lot of time hairstyles are stigmatized, especially hairstyles that black people tend to wear, whether it's like in the workforce or even like in our own Islamic communities, like if it's not a clean cut, so to speak, hairstyle, especially older generations, they tend to look at that like it's a thug or it's not like a pious man because they have locks or braids or whatever the case may be, and it's just a protective hairstyle. So I think that ties back to representation, but I think noting the hairstyle is also really important for that.
Yes, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had braids. It was a different companion who is also like one of the first people to convert. We might talk about him this week or next week. I don't know if Zayd ibn Haritha had braids, but Abdullah ibn Mas'ud did. There's some narrations that indicate when the Prophet came down from Isra and Miraj that his hair was in braids too. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Do you know? Other things you want to think about here, you have problems with racism in Muslim communities, right? Like, that's not a thing that's far-fetched. Do you know? So where does the transition come in? Because all of you haven't been here from the first time we were talking about this, but we said there's certain themes that exist within the Seerah that we're going to look at. One of them, for example, revolved around ideas of inclusivity. Right? It's a God-centric religion, and it claims a universality that is applicable to all people from all backgrounds, all of humanity, racially, culturally, ethnically. But where are there shifts in dynamics? So when Hajar, peace be upon her, is left with Ismail, peace be upon him, in the deserts by Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and there's nothing but some dates and water that they're left with, and not to go in too much detail, but the well of Zamzam springs forth at Ismail alayhi salam's feet, like Mecca is established at this. People remember what I'm talking about. Hajar, peace be upon her, is an elderly black woman. And when the Jurham tribe come and they see this water in this place where there was nothing before, they don't just steal it from her, they negotiate with her. And she says, you can stay around the water, it's an oasis, but I control the water, I'm in charge of it. Why is this tribe of Arab men negotiating with this old black lady who has an infant baby? Where do the shifts come in race and gender? Do you get what I mean? So here, the Prophet ﷺ, he's in a place where also when we think about who Allah is situating around him, that is close to him, that's going to be there as a support mechanism, this young man, Zayd ibn Haritha, is going to be one of the first converts to Islam. Zayd ibn Haritha is now in this marketplace, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to talk out the second question and tease it out a bit. Why do you think people don't teach this? Like, why is it something that's not mentioned when we're learning about some of these things? Because even depictions that get given in some of these ways, they're like completely off. Do you know? Yeah.
I really think it's just like our own problems with internalized racism. Like, you see such a tokenization of Bilal, like every single Black History Month, it's like, oh, we have Bilal, but we don't really learn about anybody else because, like, I think we are attached to the idea that Muslims are either Arab or South Asian, and anything else gets constantly questioned. I have, like, Black American friends who people will walk up to them and be like, are you sure you're Muslim? Like, recite this for me. I've had that happen to me. And we're just so attached to our own racism that we refuse to reflect on it.
Yeah. And that's definitely like probably one catalyst, right? Like, people don't teach it, and either consciously they leave it out or unconsciously they just don't think it's important. And it contributes to erasure of narrative, right? That's just what it is. Look at like the world that we live in right now. Every time you open up a newspaper, you know, there's like a imbalanced presence of like who is dying versus who's being killed, right? You can see like where language defines how narrative gets constructed. Do you know what I mean? And when you start to inherit tendencies through experiences like colonization, through imperialism, you get impacted by supremacist systems and structures, and you seek validation by trying to aspire towards whiteness, but at the very least, you want to, in a prism of anti-blackness, never be on that end of the spectrum. It starts to get to a place where it might be even worse that you're not doing it on purpose. You just think it's not important. It's something that you don't even think twice about. And it just now passes on generationally information that leaves very important pieces and details away. Zayd ibn Haritha is talked about by many people, but most of us don't think about him in our heads as a black man. And that becomes a problem because we're doing a disservice to him, right? Just think about yourself. Do you know what I mean? Right? How much would it feel if a generation from now we said, our brother Asif, someone just described him as something other than like the South Asian man that he is? Do you know what I mean? Does it do justice to his experience? Do you know? If you are Caucasian in the room, Latino in the room, you are African, African American, whatever you are, what if somebody turned you into something that you were not? And then they also didn't think it was a big deal, right? Do we see where the consequences of some of this starts to come up? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So it's important to not take these stories just as stories, but to dig a little bit deeper so it helps us to understand certain things. This is why we said in the beginning, the Seerah makes things concrete. The revelation of Quran manifests now over lived experience of the Prophet of God. If you have a family member who tells you, you can't marry someone from a different culture, you should only be friends with people of your own background, the Prophet of God has friends that are from all different races, ethnicities, and classes. There's no way to mince words here. The Seerah makes it defined. Do you get what I mean? And then you start to think also, why don't we ever eat in our house with people who come from a different background? Zayd ibn Haritha is going to be so close to the Prophet that at one large juncture of his life, he's going to be known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, Zayn the son of Muhammad. How can you be Muslim in New York City, where there's 1 million Muslims, and you don't have any Muslim friends that are from a different race or culture than you? How can you come to the Islamic Center at NYU? Look at the room that you're sitting in right now, right? Where I'm sitting, most of you are not sitting next to somebody who's from the same place as you are. How can you pray next to people side by side and not know what their names are? Do you get what I mean? And so knowing and reflecting on these things and not treating them as stories help us to then think about what is the consequence of this. Because then you also want to think, the Prophet had the best of hearts, alayhi salam. And the hadith that says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ نَظَرَ فِي قُلُوبِ الْعِبَادِ فَوَجَدَ خَيْرَ قُلُوبِ الْعِبَادِ قَلْبُ مُحَمَّدٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم, that Allah looked into the hearts of His righteous servants and He finds that the best of hearts is the heart of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَاسْتَفَاهُ لِنَفْسِهِ, He chooses him for Himself. Right? This is why He's called Al-Mustafa, the chosen one, and He endows him with the responsibility of being the last messenger to mankind. The hadith continues and it says Allah again looked into the hearts of His righteous servants and He found that the best of hearts after the heart of Muhammad were the hearts of His companions. And so He chooses them to be His wuzara, His advisors. Allah is designating hearts that are tender and soft to surround the heart of His beloved, alayhi salam, and they're people who are coming from different backgrounds and different walks of life. Do you get what I mean? So Zayd ibn Haritha, he's now in this market. And Khadija bint Khuwaylid radiallahu ta'ala anha, she is not married to the Prophet of God yet. This is where we are taking a step back in the Seerah. Khadija bint Khuwaylid, she tells her nephew that she needs some help. She doesn't have a lot of people that work for her in this way or has taken people as servants or slaves in her home. Her nephew goes to the market and purchases Zayd ibn Haritha for 400 dirhams. He's a young boy. He's not a large human being. And he's now in the home of Khadija bint Khuwaylid. When the Prophet ﷺ gets married to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, one of the things that happens is that Zayd ibn Haritha now becomes gifted essentially to the Prophet of God. It can be a hard concept to reconcile, but we're talking about a pre-modern society in which this was a practice that functioned, right? Zayd ibn Haritha is about 15 years of age, and the Prophet, we said, when he married Khadija, was how old? 25, right? So they're not like super far in age difference, but experientially, it's a very different phase of life, right? I don't know how many of you are 25 or have been 25 already, right? Or, but none of you are 15, right? So the difference between a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old, it's pretty pronounced. Do you know what I mean? Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ, he now develops this deep relationship with Zayd ibn Haritha. They become very close to each other. They spend a lot of time together. They do a lot of different things. Haritha, who is Zayd's father, he's still been looking for his son. They're searching everywhere. Haritha is from a tribe that is an elite tribe. It's a prominent tribe. He's not coming from like a lower social class. He and his other son, they are going around. They get news of people who have gone for Hajj to Mecca, because Mecca is still a place where people come for pilgrimage. And after they've spent like years now looking for Zayd ibn Haritha, someone has said to them that we've seen him like in Mecca in this place. Haritha's other son goes and he sees Zayd ibn Haritha with a group of people along with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they're in Mecca near the Kaaba. So Haritha says to the Prophet ﷺ, "This is who I am. I will pay you anything for my son." And the Prophet ﷺ, he's just an honest man. And he says, "Let's bring Zayd. You're his father. You don't have to pay anything for him." Zayd ibn Haritha comes now. And you can imagine what the moment must feel like. He was a boy when he is stripped away from his mother in the midst of the night, sold into slavery. All of that creates like a lot of agitation. Zayd ibn Haritha now sees with the Prophet his father and his uncle. The Prophet ﷺ, he now says to Zayd ibn Haritha, "Do you know these two guys?" He's not going to just send him away with random strangers. He's got to make sure, like, are these men who they claim to be? And Zayd ibn Haritha says, "This is my father and my uncle." And the Prophet ﷺ, he says to him that you should go with your father. And Zayd ibn Haritha says, "I want to stay here with Muhammad." He's not a young boy at this point. He's older now, but he's still the child of his parents. Zayd ibn Haritha's father starts to engage him. "What are you talking about?" And the Prophet ﷺ continues, like, "Just go with your dad." Zayd ibn Haritha's father, he says to then his son, "Ya Zayd, atakhtaru al-ubudiyya al-huriyya?" That, are you choosing slavery over freedom? وَعَلَى أَبِيكَ وَأُمِّكَ وَبَلَدِكَ وَقَوْمِكَ, and over your father and over your mother and over your balad, your city, and everything, like your people. It's an interesting thing to think about in terms of language. Do you get what I mean? Societally, it's still a stratified society. This young man, Zayd ibn Haritha, is of noble birth. He wasn't supposed to be in this situation. And he's now not being asked about, you're in this place, like, what are you doing? but he's being asked societally, why would you want to be in a lower sphere and be someone's servant versus being in an upper sphere and being free? He's thinking about it from the standpoint of social stigmas and social implications, right? It's not any different than what a lot of families will say to people now. What would people say if we let our daughter marry so-and-so and such and such? What would people say if you didn't have this job or that job? Do you get what I mean? So like, what are you thinking? But his vantage point is also uninformed, because Zayd ibn Haritha isn't saying that I want to choose servitude. He's saying, I choose Muhammad. There's a difference. Do you get what I mean? His father does not know the Prophet Muhammad. He's not in a place where his comprehension is in the same sphere. They're not of Mecca. And so when he says that I want to stay, you got to think about this, that there's got to be like a real love here. Do you get what I mean? I don't know what all of your relationships are like with your parents and your family, right? Many of you have seen my kids and the way that we spend time together and interact with each other. You've met Kareem and Medina. Make dua for them. I love them very deeply. They're the greatest blessings in my life. I can't imagine what my children would feel if someone took them away from my wife and I, let alone what we would feel. Do you know? And Zayd ibn Haritha, he experienced that. He's not happy that he's away from his dad. Do you get what I mean? So you think about the dilemma, the conundrum that comes into play. But he's now established a relationship with the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the same man when he was a child, Halima Sa'diyah, when we talked about her, she was looking for every reason to keep the Prophet in her home as an infant, as she nursed him. There's just barakah, there's blessing. Zayd ibn Haritha, he knows this, he says this. There's just something special about this man. He's not a prophet at this time, but he's experienced it and it becomes undeniable. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he is in a place where he is experiencing this, and he's just standing and not saying anything. Do you get what I mean? Because it's not his place. Do you know? What's he going to fundamentally do? He can't get in the way. And so Haritha asks his son, like, what's so special? And he says, he treats me like his own family. Like I'm one of his children, even better than that. This is a man whose skin color, whose social class, place in society is seen as a commodity. And he's in this circumstance where he's saying, he treats me better than family treats like itself. Do you see what I mean? And you gotta just think, what a beautiful person the Prophet of God must have been, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how we deprive ourselves by not knowing who he is or embodying what his teachings teach us. How is it that he's an elite person married to a rich woman in a society that could care less about how you treat people, and even the people who are kidnapped and trafficked are saying, he treats me better than anybody else? Everybody felt special around the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so when now it is determined that Zayd ibn Haritha is going to just be with the Prophet takes him near the Kaaba And he announces to everybody, Zayd is free from today. He is henceforth known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. He will inherit from me. He's assuming the kinship of this young man. His father said to have been happy by this because he sees to the extent that the Prophet is going to provide and support. And just think about it conceptually again. The Prophet of God is taking this young black man to the steps of the Kaaba, and he is saying, he is now my son. He is part of who I am. Do you get what I mean? You don't want to be somebody who begrudgingly welcomes someone into your family or tokenize. Here's my one friend from a different background. Do you know? You don't want to be embarrassed by the people that you claim to love because they might not dress the way you think a Muslim should dress, or they might not behave the way you think a Muslim should behave, or they might not do certain things that are rooted in what kind of sense of shame and honor. The Prophet tells the entire community, he is now Zayd ibn Muhammad. He is free. He inherits from me. And everybody just treats him the way the Prophet has now proclaimed to treat him. It's not questioned. It's not doubted. Because when there's real love, there's no doubt to sincerity and conviction. Do you get what I mean? Not as a side, but you have to understand here that later on verses are going to be revealed that say you cannot assume the natal identity of any individual. A child is always the son or daughter of their parents. And there's wisdom to this because people are disgusting, right? People can be beautiful, but they can also be very egotistical. My wife and I became foster parents some time ago. We've had a couple of placements. Some of you met our most recent foster daughter, who, alhamdulillah, was able to get reunited with her family. But as we go through this, right, we start out, because my wife is a much better human being than I am, and she said we should become foster parents. I don't know a lot of Muslim foster parents, especially in New York. There's a friend of mine who did his doctorate here, who's now a dean at a medical university. He and his wife were the only people that I knew that were doing it. So I asked him about it. My wife and I became, foster parents. It's a process. And we were in a place where, as we went through the process, it also became very easy to see how people can manipulate the process. And in my wife's client base, she often, without violating confidentiality, will tell me about children who she knows who are survivors of abuse because they were taken as foster children or adopted by corrupt human beings and individuals. Whether you choose to have your own children or have already had your own children, you should understand that this is a religion that teaches us to take care of orphans, to be kind to them, to bring them into our homes. You can establish bonds of kinship and make someone a mahram to you. But I told my wife right in the beginning, we live in a small Manhattan apartment. Many of you have been in our place. From the size of Manhattan apartments, is bigger than most, but it's still a Manhattan apartment, alhamdulillah. And so I said, look, if I have to inconvenience myself, that's what I'm going to do. What's the alternative? These kids are going to live on the street. They're going to just be in a place where they go through a formative period of their identity and they're not loved. So something for you to think about for yourself, that you revive this practice, that you are taking care of the world's forgotten children, and not just those who are of global crisis, which we need to do also. And one of the projects we're going to do this Ramadan is we're going to be providing aid to children who have evacuated from Gaza that are now in Turkey, and they have lost limbs, they're amputees, they don't have funds for surgeries, and they need living expenses covered until they're able to go back home. And may Allah bless them to return back to their homeland. But in being able to understand it, that's one aspect. But also, there's tons of people who are just here in New York that nobody's looking after them. I know because I've been inside these foster homes and these other places, and they're just like alone, you know? How can they be alone when there's 1 million of us in New York? Do you get what I mean? So you can't have a simplistic understanding around things like adoption and whatever else. It's a lot more nuanced than sometimes we think about it. Zayd ibn Haritha, he is this close to the Prophet of God. And he has a lot of other instances in his story that you should look at and read. He's with the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet goes to Taif. Taif is like a difficult experience, the toughest day in his life, the Prophet says. He's abused, he's beaten, he's mistreated by the chieftains of Taif. At this point in his life, Khadija has died, Abu Talib has died, he is in Taif, he's already sad. It's called the year of depression in the Seerah literature. We'll talk about it as we get towards the end of the Meccan period. Zayd ibn Haritha is with him at this time. The only person that's with him, who witnesses all of this, experiences that pain and trauma. He's with the Prophet at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. He's an advisor to the Prophet as he goes through his life. They have a close, deep relationship. And he's considered to be one of the first 4 who embrace Islam. The 4th person we're going to talk about is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, who many of you probably have heard his name. He's a close friend of the Prophet of God. He is also one of the first who become Muslim, and he has just a deep conviction and faith in Islam, Allah, and His Messenger. His iman is quite impeccable, mashallah, and he just really believes in the Prophet and everything that the Prophet tells him and teaches him. The virtues of who Abu Bakr is, radiallahu an, we can talk about in a lot of detail, but at this point, some of the things that we want to think about strategically is that he's a close friend of the Messenger of God. And Abu Bakr radiallahu an has certain skills, but he's also from an elite tribe. He's in a place where he has access to upper levels of society. He's known for his intellect, his intellectual capacity, but he also has a unique skill in that he knows genealogy really well. And so what happens in this early phase now of propagation, the early dawah of the Prophet is not public, it's very private. They're only speaking to people that they know would have an inclination to Islam. Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he rounds up this group of 4 that's with the Prophet right in the beginning. Khadija bint Khuwaylid, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Zayd ibn Haritha, and Abdullah ibn Abi Qahafa, who we know as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. May Allah be pleased with all of them. I want you to think, before we move into his story a little bit and some of what he was doing, what do you think these 4 people are bringing to the Prophet in this early stage? Because he's still learning about also like prophethood as an experience. In the first 3 years of revelation, there's no confrontations because there's no public calling to Islam. Nobody's fighting. There's no like physical abuse, boycotts, abuse of that nature. There's going to be some drastic changes because when you get to the last 6-7 years of the Meccan period, which is 13 years altogether, it's going to get pretty heavy in terms of people being assassinated, people being killed, people being boycotted. But the first 3 years, there's none of that because it's all done very privately. They're just engaging with people. It gets to about, overall, they say like 35 to 40 people are Muslim at the end of that first few years. But why these 4 out of everybody? If we were to try to think about like divine timing, divine wisdom, what is it that they're really offering to the Prophet in this moment? They're all converts, by the way, right? Everybody's a convert here. Ali radiallahu an, some would say he's not a convert just because he was so young when he embraced Islam that he was always Muslim, they would say, right? Allah knows best. But they're all willfully accepting Islam. Do you know? Leaving where it was that they were and converting to this religion. So why these 4? Why not Abdurrahman ibn Auf? Why not Bilal ibn Rabah? Why not Uthman ibn Affan? Why not any of these other people? Why in this early phase, when they're now laying out the core of what will be an epicenter for the establishment of a community, what do we think that the Prophet is gaining from these 4 individuals? What is it that they're providing to him, and in turn he's giving to them as well? Does the question make sense? So if we can talk about it for a few minutes, like why these 4? And it's conjecture, right? We don't know definitively, right? But what do you think they're bringing in this critical mode? Because they also are like super Muslims for the rest of this. Do you know what I mean? And we talk about Abu Bakr, through him in that early phase, he brings people to Islam in those first, like, however many days and weeks. Of the people that Abu Bakr brings, like, to Islam and convinces them of Islam, right? And we'll talk about the genealogy piece and how that factors in. 5 of them are deemed to be of the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 who are guaranteed paradise by the Prophet of God. Do you know what I mean? They're there right from the beginning. Do you know? And other than these 4, what else do they have right now? An initial set of revelations, and they have wudu and salah. Do you get what I mean? So why this? The Prophet, these 4 people, wudu and salah. Why are these the things that Allah has given to the Prophet in the early part of early revelation? If we can talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Abid from Egypt.
MashaAllah.
I'm Arabic.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Where are you from?
I'm from Kashmir.
From Kashmir.
Yeah, mashallah.
I want to mention you're very, very fantastic.
Yeah, Jazakallah.
Yeah,
Sorry, this is all on the stream.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't watch it.
Sorry.
No, it's
I want to mention you that you talk about sorry.
So that was my first thought. I guess it was really sucked if like you receive revelation and then people you're supposed to be that would kind of make bring it home. Time is throwing me off too. I'm just like,
I guess it's a challenge for both of them. I was gonna say it's like, we're never
We're also talking about Muslims alive today. You can think about this throughout history. There's numbers a lot bigger.
that's all it was. It's like we'll be a team. I guess it would do more. I don't know. I guess it's like purification. It's like what keeps us
Yeah, that is yes.
Okay, so what do we think? Wudu, Salah, these four people, they're Muslim. Our brother Abid, mashallah, he reminded me, one of the other virtues of Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anh is that he's the only companion whose name is explicitly mentioned in the Quran. Right, so in Surah Al-Ahzab, in verse 37, like Zayd radiallahu anh's name is explicitly mentioned. Abu Bakr, we're going to talk in a bit, he is alluded to in the Quran, but his name isn't specifically there. Zayd radiallahu anh is the only companion whose name is mentioned explicitly in that verse in the Quran. So why do we think this is what is given to the Prophet in this early part of Revelation, right? He's got wudu, he's got salah, he's got these verses from the Quran, and he's got these four people who have now become Muslim. What did we talk about? I heard everybody talking.
Aisha had a really good point.
She did? I appreciate you volunteering her. Thank you. She looks so happy now. Yeah.
I was saying that since in the first 3 years of it's a smaller private gathering and circles that they're practicing, that the focus was on establishing your connection to Allah, and prayer is one way to do that. So just like the focus on that and wudu.
Yeah, great. Right, and sometimes we forget, wudu is its own spiritual act. Do you know what I mean? Wudu is not an act that's only connected to salah. Do you know? You should try as much as you can to be in wudu like all the time, as best as you can. Right? It creates like a different state of just kind of presence, etc. as a tangent. What else? What else do we talk about? Like why these four people, why wudu, why salah? Yeah.
I was thinking maybe because of their age, and also they will follow the Prophet during different stages, and also some of them will become Khalifa, so they could establish a good relationship that will be transmit to the Ummah.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. And building off of that, well, let me take a pause. What else did we talk about?
I just wanted to add up on that, like emotional support and strength, I would say. And that on building to the network, like she said, that can be a thing.
Yeah, emotional support. It's not easy, it's heavy, right? Oh my God, I'm the prophet of God. Do you know? Like think about people you know in your life who didn't expect they were going to become parents, right? We're having a baby. Oh man, what are we going to do? Right? Like, how are we going to pay for this thing? How are we going to, you know what I mean? He's now the last messenger to humanity. And that's got to soak in. And really, he's already been told by Waraka, your people are going to throw you out. Right? There's a lot that goes on there. Other thoughts? So, when you look at these four people, and again, it's just like objective, it's not, absolute, but they're all very different from each other, right? Khadija bint Khuwaylid, she is a businesswoman who is married to the Prophet, but also is kind of in her elder years of existence. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he comes into the Prophet's home because of poverty in Abu Talib's house. And he's a young boy. He's 30 years younger than the Prophet of God. Zayd ibn Haritha, his upbringing is from a prominent tribe that's outside of Mecca. He is not like from the same tribes as Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, or Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu an, or the Prophet alayhi salam. He's also different from a racial standpoint, an ethnic standpoint. Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he comes from an elite background, and he is like a well-known man in the society. Already by themselves, they show that this religion is for everybody. Do you know? Because what if everybody was all just like a rich, wealthy man like Abu Bakr? What if all of them were just like Qurayshi? What if all of them were just like people who were poor? Do you get what I mean? Their ability now, not just outwardly, but inwardly, to synthesize and process through their own respective experiences are going to be something. Because the Prophet ﷺ is not somebody who just talks at people. He doesn't tell Ali, now you're Muslim, you're a kid and you're in my house, right? So go pray with us. But he's explaining to him what he does. He gives him an opportunity to think and reflect upon it. There's like experience that's there when he comes down from the mountain and he's shocked at receiving revelation. He's vulnerable to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and he says, I'm scared, I don't know what's going to happen. It's a beautiful relationship in terms of what healthy love looks like. And then it happens again when the second revelation comes, right? But they're all in a place where they have representation of different things. And what's amazing, they're all praying the same prayer. They're all performing the same wudu. They're all engaged in an act of worship right from the beginning to the same God. There's a sense that this is something that's accessible to everybody. And right from the beginning, it is demonstrating that this isn't meant just for a certain segment of society. It's meant for people from everywhere. Zayd ibn Haritha isn't even from Mecca, and he's now one of the first people to convert. He's literally from someplace else, and he's in the first group of Muslims. Do you get what I mean? And the convening point that brings them all together is a belief in God, a belief in God's messenger, and they manifest this in the form of salah that they are undertaking. It's not to belabor the point, but salah is with Muslims from day one. It's not in the 5 daily prayer cycle that we got at Isra and Miraj, but they have salah right from the beginning. And you cannot undermine this. It's not something to just think in a very superficial way. It's purposeful. You need salah in your life. Not when it's convenient, not when you feel like it, but even when it's not feeling a certain way. You don't worship the feeling, you worship the one that you're worshiping through the act of worship. So you don't have to know what it's doing for you, but just like Allah put these 4 individuals who love the Prophet so much, and the Prophet loves so much, and they're there as a security, a protection, a source of comfort, that's what wudu and salah are also there for. And if you think about them in a different way, then that's from your vantage point and perspective. It's not going to be used in the way that it's intended as a gift. Do you get what I mean? Abu Bakr radiallahu an is known in a lot of different ways, but his title of being as-Siddiq is something that is attached to just his faith and conviction in who the Prophet ﷺ is. Like when we talked about Isra and Miraj, when it was happening some days ago, people start to doubt because the mushrikeen of Mecca, they're saying to Muslims, this is what your messenger wants us to believe. And people are, why is he saying this? When they come to Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Abu Bakr says, if my friend said it, it must be true. There's no doubt. He says to them, I believe him in many things that are even more remarkable than this. Why wouldn't I believe him in this? There's just deep sense of faith and conviction. He's the first Khalifa in Islam. He's known as being somebody who's tender and soft. When the Prophet is sick towards the end of his life, at the end of Revelation, he tells Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Muru Abu Bakr fayusalli bin nas, that find Abu Bakr, tell him to lead the people in prayer. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, Inna kana abi rajulan asif, that indeed my father is a very tender, soft man, meaning when he prays, he's going to cry. And the Prophet says, go tell him to lead the prayer. Do you know? In the early part of Muslim experience, when they do start the public propagation of Islam, Abu Bakr used to read Quran in the courtyard of his home, and people would get attracted to his voice. They would hear his tears. The Meccans, they didn't want this to be the case. So they told him, you need to stop doing this right now. Abu Bakr, who is super close to the Prophet, they are best friends. Before there's a migration to Medina, he says to the Prophet, do you give me permission to leave for Mecca? And the Prophet, alayhi salam, gives him permission. He's leaving from Mecca, and he gets stopped by a man by the name of Ibn Daghina. Ibn Daghina says to Abu Bakr, where are you going? And he says, I'm going where I can worship my God freely. He's got no protection here, you know? The chieftains of Mecca, they are trying to get him to stop. Ibn Daghina, who's not Muslim, says to Abu Bakr, you are under my protection. If anybody bothers you, tell them that I am protecting you. Right? It's a tribalistic society. This is how it functions. And he says to Abu Bakr, if people like you start to leave from our community, our entire community will suffer. He's not even Muslim. But he just knows that the presence of Abu Bakr brings benefit to everybody. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is with the Prophet alayhi salam in the cave as they are leaving now from the persecution of the Meccans. He plays critical roles at various junctures in the Prophet's life that, in the interest of time, we're not going to go into. But in this early part of Revelation, he becomes very key in bringing certain individuals to Islam, because also they have to be successful in who they bring to Islam, right? Because if they start to get people who are like, I don't believe in this thing, then the conversations that are going to ensue are going to be, nobody wants to follow these people. Because Abu Bakr has this relationship to genealogy, he's able to establish a bond with individuals by knowing and recognizing their lineage. The conversation starts now in a place strategically, where he can say to somebody, if he doesn't know them, tell me who you are and who your family is. And when he does know them and he speaks to them in this tribalistic society that is rooted in who you are the child of and who that person is the child of, going back to your ancestors, right? The Prophet ﷺ is the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. Everybody knows this. Abdul Muttalib is like the savior of Mecca, the one who found Zamzam again. All of these different things. You see? So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, why it's not just a random tidbit, but in this society, when he's sitting now and talking to people, he can say, you're the grandson of so-and-so. That is somebody who's related to this man through this connection. These people are part of your community, your tribe, your lineage. That's how you're connected to this group of people. And it starts to bring a bond, like a common bond, that the conversation opens up now in relation to what the Prophet ﷺ is speaking about. Does it make sense? Through Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Uthman ibn Affan becomes Muslim, Talha ibn Ubaidullah becomes Muslim, Abdurrahman ibn Auf becomes Muslim, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas becomes Muslim, Abu Ubaidah ibn Al-Jarrah becomes Muslim, Abu Salama becomes Muslim, Az-Zubair becomes Muslim, Khalid ibn Sa'id becomes Muslim. You don't have to know the names of all these people or their stories. You should read them and reflect upon them, because they're also tangible examples in certain ways in relation to how now, as the Prophet disseminates knowledge, these people, they struggle with it, you know? Like one of the ways the Prophet and the Quran, Allah abolishes slavery as a practice was when everybody screwed up on something, the recompense was you had to set free a slave, right? So all over the Muslim community, as people are struggling with like keeping their fasts and doing this and doing that, it's like, well, set a slave free, set a slave free, set a slave free. And they just set slaves free everywhere. There's divine understanding. You contrast it to the manner in which like emancipation takes place in this country. It literally leads to civil war. Or you look at prohibition of alcohol, right? It comes down in gradations, 3 verses, right? There's good in it and there's bad in it, but the bad outweighs the good. You should probably leave it behind. Don't come to prayer in a state of intoxication. And then outright prohibition. And they say the streets become flooded in alcohol because people are just primed to drop it off. In this country, when they enact prohibition, not only do people not stop drinking, more people start drinking. And they start drinking illegally. They're bootlegging because there's no human understanding that's there. You see? And so as the Prophet is passing on like these details to people, it's a very human understanding. They all make mistakes. They're not perfect. That's not the idea of this religion, to pursue perfection. If that's what you want, this is the wrong religion for you. This is a religion that acknowledges and understands Allah is Al-Wadud, the source of all love, and He loves us in all of our diversity, as well as with a recognition of the imperfections that we have. And so here, you're in this place where when you read about these companions and understand their lives, they're real people who they're trying to also get acclimated and accustomed to what their religion is teaching them. It's not that it came down to all of them, and all of them were just able to do it meticulously and magnificently. Some of them also had struggles too. It makes them tangible in a different way. Abu Bakr radiallahu an is bringing remarkable individuals to Islam in this early phase. But they're also growing now with strategy. There's a place where people are coming in. A good number of the early Muslims in those dozens that accept Islam, they come from lower social classes, lower amounts of wealth. They're from the lower levels of a stratified society. There's a hadith that we'll look at later where the Roman Emperor Heraclius, he speaks to Abu Sufyan and asks him questions about this new prophet. And one of the questions he asks him is, tell me about his followers. Like, who are they? Are they from the rich, the elite? Abu Sufyan says, no, they're from like the poor, the needy. And Heraclius says, this is a sign of true prophethood. Because when you think about people who struggle with accepting Islam, right? And you have to be honest, not self-deprecating. The wealthy and elite have more challenges because they're wondering what they're going to have to lose societally if they embrace this thing. The poor and the needy, they don't have so much to begin with, so what is it going to really be? They can have a true, honest conversation with it because they're not so worried about losing stuff, And that becomes something that is pretty much consistent with other prophets that come before. And so you find in this grouping of individuals now, in 3 years of this period of initial revelation, a mix of individuals that have people that are from the elite, like Abu Bakr, but you also have people who come from lower demographics of society, like Ali radiallahu anh is not wealthy. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who we talked about briefly before, one of the first converts, who was also a black companion, known for his commitment to Quran, was the first person to recite Quran publicly in Mecca in front of the Kaaba and gets beaten for it. He's of a physically small stature. He was a shepherd by profession, right? These are the people who are making up this early grouping of people. In these first 3 years, they're just building a relationship to their deen as well as to each other. They're creating now a bond, a cohesion that becomes really important. You want to, when you come into this space, begin to be people who are willing and open to actually embrace each other as sisters and brothers. As a community, we achieve a lot, alhamdulillah. You all, in the last 3 months of the year, last year, raised $3 million in relief funds for the people of Gaza. May Allah grant them ease and end the occupation that's taking place there, and make us a generation that witnesses a free Palestine in our lifetime. Can you imagine what we could do if everybody knew each other's name? Because just think about it. Whether when you left from here, you had at least some type of relationship that said, hey, how's your sick uncle doing? Did you find a job yet? Can I help you with anything? I didn't see you last week here. I noticed you were gone. Aside from the sense of how you let people feel noticed, and you actually bring depth to a relationship, it cultivates now what is necessary. These people in these 3 years, they come together in such a way that their cohesion allows for this religion to exist now for 14 centuries and contemporarily is 2 billion strong in every part of the world. You think they had room to just ignore one another? Or say, I don't want to eat iftar with this person or dinner with that person, or why is that guy leading me in prayer, or any of this kind of stuff? The beauty of their relationship is rooted on the shared faith that they have. Not shared externals, shared race, shared ethnicity, shared class, but shared internals, shared values, shared hearts. You don't want to be part of a Muslim community where people pray together for years, but they have never actually had any type of connection to one another. And for them to build what they build, those first 3 years of private dawah become very important, as they are connected deeper now to this sense of conviction, their iman in Allah, their iman in the Messenger of Allah, alayhi salam, their iman in the Quran that is beginning to be revealed to them with regularity, different revelations that are coming down. But they're also connecting to each other in meaningful ways. If you ever come to any of our convert programs, and you see what it's like when we have a monthly brunch that is just converts in a room with converts. And they don't even know each other so deeply, but there's still just a joy. Because they know what they're connecting on is a shared Islam and a shared experience. That doesn't mean that it's only unique to converts, but their entry point is Allah and His Messenger. Not a gathering that the entry point is, hey, we all come from the same professional industry. Hey, we all come from the same country of origin. Hey, we all eat the same level of spice in our food. Do you get what I mean? It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have spaces that also cater to certain segments. We need black spaces for black people to be able to talk about things that black people can only relate to as black people, just like Latinos, just like women, just like an abundance of segments. But that doesn't make it either or, it's both and. all of you are seated here right now. If you learn how to come together purely on the basis of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, you will be a force that no one can reckon with. And that's what these people do. For 3 years, they polish their relationship to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and they reinform relationships that they had with people that they knew prior to, as well as establish relationships with people who were new. Abu Bakr is an elite, powerful man. You think the people of Mecca, they're gathered in ways where they're hanging out the way that these guys are hanging out? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Zayd ibn Haritha, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, like they're all in the same spaces. This is what is revolutionary from the standpoint of Muslims. The Jami'ah is another word for masjid, right? But it's rooted in, etymologically, the idea of gathering together. There's no place in this entire Meccan Arabia that anybody can just walk into this place. Any person from any background can come into this masjid and just be there. That's not something that they do. You can't build a relationship with people if you don't spend time with them. This is why we ask you to start talking to each other in these discussions, so you learn people's names, and the next time you come, like you already know some people, and then you sit next to somebody else and you talk to them too, and then you ideate together. Nobody's saying within the circles, hey, tell everybody what you do for a living. Hey, where did you go to school, or what do you study? We just say, like, build a relationship on something that's other than that. And I say this to you because now as we move from crisis to crisis, that's just a thing. Allah make it easy for all those who are going through difficulty. We have to continue to build and grow, not just in response to situations that need our attention, like floods and earthquakes and conflicts, but also building services, institutions, things that we are poised to build here together. Who's going to do it? You are. But how are you going to do it? With one another. How can you do it together if you don't know each other or spend time with one another? And then these are just dozens of people. After this first 3 years, we're going to start talking about next week what's going to happen, because verses start coming down, Surah Al-Shu'ara and others that are about commanding now the Prophet to go talk to people publicly. We'll talk about it in more detail next week, but he first focuses on his own clan, the Banu Hashim, brings them together for meals, propagates Islam to them. Abu Lahab, like at the dinner, gets up and walks out to disrupt it. The second dinner, the Prophet just catches him more in advance and tells people. Then there's the famous instance where he's standing now on the mountain. Would you believe me if I said there's an army behind you waiting to attack, right? We'll go into it in more detail. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he's one of the first people to make a public address on Islam. The people beat him into a coma. He's unconscious for more than a day. His clan, when they find this out, because it's still a clan-based society, the man who beats him, they say, if Abu Bakr dies from this, we will publicly kill this man. Nobody can do anything. That's how the society functions. But I want you to think about this. They live in Mecca, which is a large city that is the epicenter of this place because of the Kaaba. And there's dozens of them in the beginning, scattered now throughout the day as it becomes public, in a society that is hostile and antagonistic to them. How do they get through it? They lean on each other. You have access to people that you can lean on, but you are not leaning on them because you're not taking a step towards somebody to just build depth to a relationship. That then enables you, when you are scattered throughout a city, that is deeply secular and anti-Muslim as a symptom of anti-blackness, you can still convene and replenish by having a deep bond together. Do you see what I mean? So for 3 years, they are percolating this before they go out now and go through like a lot of tribulation. Because these guys don't want somebody that's going to mess up their business. Their teachings are taking money away from the people of Mecca. So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail from next week, but I would invite you all to like turn to people and actually have meaningful interactions, right? And to think out like, hey, how do we build this together? And it's not easy, I know. My wife, I've told you this in other halaqat, when we got married, there was more than 2,000 people at our wedding ceremony. It was an open invite. Anyone could come if they want to. Some of you might have been there. I don't know. But, you know, it was beautiful. It was just a lot of well-wishers who self-selected to come. A month into our marriage, my wife said to me, you don't have any friends. And I said, what are you talking about? We just had thousands of people at our wedding. And she said, you don't have any friends. No deep relationships. You don't invest time, etc. And when I acknowledged it, along with other things that she told me about myself that I didn't want to hear, it now got to a place where I saw the value in it, but I had to figure out, how do you make friends? Right? I got married when I was about to turn 29. I wasn't 5. Do you know? My wife, very, kindly, you want me to call someone and ask them if they want it? I'm like, no, I don't need you to set adult play dates for me. Right? But I can tell you I'm 41 now. I started working here when I was 22. And every day I wake up with more energy as a 41-year-old than I did throughout my 20s. It's not only because I am willing to acknowledge the importance of companionship in my life, but I'm willing to acknowledge the importance of good companionship. Not just friends, but friends that compel me towards something. And to find meaning in relationships and connections to people, that the world makes it easy for me to get away with never talking to people like that. But then I'm the one that misses out. And so I'm saying it to you because I know what it feels like, the awkwardness. Do I just go up and talk to somebody, right? Like, it's like, I'm trying to date this guy, what if he says no, he doesn't want to hang out with me? What am I going to do? It's so embarrassing. No, man. Like, you're all nice people, and there's a lot of nice people that come here. There are some jerks, I'm not going to lie, but houses of God are open to everybody, right? You just have to deal with that. But most of you are going to meet people who are very kind, just like you. And when you can build depth, it then allows for you to turn to the person next to you and be bold enough to say, hey, what are we going to build together? How are we going to actually be the one that responds when they put out the call to make that shelter, make that clinic? It's not somebody else, it's me. What's the idea that we'll come up with? And we'll go to him and say, this is what we want to do. Help us make it happen. And then you become bold enough to say to the person next to you, how do we leave the world a little bit better than the state in which we found it? It's a lot easier when you have a bond that's built on something that comes from here, not something that's rooted in just what's external. Do you get what I mean? So what I'd like you to do is just take 2 minutes before we wrap up. Turn to the persons next to you. What are you taking away from tonight's conversation on a whole? Zayd ibn Haritha, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, these first few years of revelation, anything that's coming up, we'll come back and discuss. Just make a couple of announcements, then we'll wrap up for today. But go ahead.
I actually
Assalamualaikum. How are you? It's nice to see you.
It's a great class.
Yeah, come back whenever you can. Yeah. I'll see you soon, inshallah. Assalamualaikum.
I think I missed it. My friend said, what was that?
These actually get stimulated.
Yeah. Another version of it today.
Certain breaks and a lot of times it's like different breaks and all come back to it's like things like that. Oh, why? So I was like, whatever. I don't even know how I usually I don't even go about things like that. I just know why. I'll never forget the sports and about I remember like one thing
He gives us my number, and then we watch it.
Okay. So what are some of the things we're taking away from today? What are things coming up for people? Who wants to start? Anybody? What are you taking away from tonight's conversation?
I got something, Imam Khalid.
Yeah.
I was telling my buddies here that a couple things tonight actually. Number one, I never met a convert to Islam until I came to the IC. I just grew up. I know. I grew up around like just people born into Islam, and then I wasn't practicing Islam, so I wasn't really actively trying to meet Muslim people. So when I came here, it was the first time I saw like people taking shahada in front of me and stuff like that. And I was telling my buddies that now my closest Muslim friends in the city are the ones who converted to Islam. So
Mashallah.
thank you for the IC for that. And I also never heard a black perspective of Islam until I started going to Princeton Muslim Life program. And it was Imam Suhaib Sultan, and inshallah Allah has mercy on him. But he always invite black imams as guest speakers, and then after when he passed away, Imam Khalid came from Dartmouth down to Princeton, and he's the first imam that talked about that black perspective. Like even the story, like you said, he'll be talking about like how the Sahaba left Abyssinia. I never, like where I grew up, it was nice to learn Islam from like the Arab perspective. Like I was really grateful for that, but we never talked about that black perspective. And I don't take it as like they avoided it, like maybe they themselves were not educated on it themselves from their education of Islam, but yeah, it's places like Princeton Muslim Life program with Imam Suhaib Sultan, and even with you here at the IC, that my whole perspective of Islam really changed. It wasn't that like black or not, it wasn't that like this is what Islam is, like it's more like this is Islam, like a really broader thing. And there's a lot more for me to learn. Like I don't really know anything, to be honest. So
Yeah, none of us, man.
Yeah, so.
Other thoughts? Anything that come up from today? Stood out, takeaways? Great. So, a couple of things. Saturday, we're doing a film screening hosted by our Latino Muslim group, but open to the entire community. It's going to be at 5 o'clock in the 4th floor auditorium next door. There'll be dinner as well. And the documentary that we're screening, it focuses on the development of a Muslim community in Chiapas, Mexico, going through kind of the historical construction of the community, where they are today. The director is going to be doing a talk back. You should definitely come. Similar to how many of us have benefited from our Black Muslim lecture series and things through various programs that help us to understand the nuanced experiences of demographics that quite often just don't get engaged within broader Muslim communities, unfortunately. You want to be able to understand the depth of experience within Latino Muslim Islam, as well as understanding kind of the historical development of it. We have a growing convert community, but there's also many members of our community who are Latino, Muslim, and they're not converts. You know, they're second, third generation in their families. And there's so much that we can understand and gain. So I would say, like, come, show support. You know, the room should be as full as possible. There's going to be dinner as well. You'll get an opportunity to broaden in that perspective of Islam and learn something and just be around community. That's the second thing I would say on that. Right, it's still like a very tough time for a lot of people. You know, Allah make it easy. You want to frequent spaces that you know are going to be uplifting. And if you're not in a place where you're feeling alone or run down, then because you have a sense of kind of replenishment, your love for experiencing that for yourself should want you to be that for somebody else. So there's going to be people who will come, and it'll just mean that much more to them if they see that you're seated in a seat and you came knowing that you provide community to somebody else. Does that make sense? Right? So try to come. It's 5 o'clock, pray Maghrib, have the film screening. There's going to be some presentations and other things. It'll be a nice night, mashallah. I think my wife and I, my kids are going to be there too. So if you want to meet my kids who I talk about all the time, or my wife who I talk about all the time if you haven't met her before, they're really amazing, mashallah. Just people that tend to like them more than me after they meet them. So please just keep that in mind. It'd be nice. And then next Monday, the building is closed. So if you typically come on Mondays to the halakas that we do here in Iftar, we're going to do that at my apartment on Monday, inshallah. I'd love to have all of you come over, even if you're not typically there. I know for a lot of people, Monday is also a holiday, so we'll still have a potluck iftar. Maghrib is at around 5:30. We'll have some food that we order as well. But it'd be great to break fast with everyone, to do all of that also in a different space. Might just kind of change up the vibe a bit. And depending on how many people come, we'll still do the halakas that we normally do, but maybe augment it so that we're able to spend a little bit more time just in community and really benefit from each other's presence. But we do the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi on Mondays, and then a Ramadan prep class after that, as well as iftar prior to. So that won't be here. That'll be in our apartment building on 23rd and 3rd, which some of you have been to, but not all of you have been. And we'll send out a standalone email about it, just so it doesn't get lost in the mix, so people know it's just distinct for that day. So look out for it, and tell people also if they have nothing else to do on that Monday, we can all have iftar together and try to fast if you can, right? If you have the capacity to fast, so you're getting ready for Ramadan, and then at the very least, if it's a tough day of fasting, you're at least breaking fast with people and able to experience that with others who can also relate and kind of understand. Anything else that we have to announce right now that I'm forgetting?
After this week.
No?
Oh, we have iftar tomorrow.
There's iftar tomorrow also, yeah. On Mondays and Thursdays, we always do it here. We provide food, but it's also potluck, so feel free to come and bring whatever you'd like. Last week, his brother Corey, who's a chef, he made chicken tagine for everybody. It was amazing. And brother Inam, who some of you might know, is one of the elders in our community. He brought biryani for everybody. And there was, like all the typical stuff. We have fruits and cheese and cucumbers and bagels, etc. But you can also come without bringing something. But again, you just want to be in spaces with people and kind of have that experience. Okay, we prayed Isha before we started. If anybody needs to pray, feel free to make a Jamaat together. We'll see everybody next Wednesday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.